Hello, YouTube land. It's been a couple months since I've done a video because I was thinking about what I wanted, this particular subject matter, and not just that, but a variety of other things. And so I took a little bit of extra time. So the reason, what I'm going to do today, and the reason I'm doing it is I think it's important because of all that's being done today in terms of predicting things. We've got a absolute boatload of things that you can go on the internet and people are predicting everything. Everything from doom and gloom to greatest revival in the world's coming. That you could run across the gamut and get a smattering of opinions about a great many things. So what I wanted to do is go over three major events in the Bible to give you a very simple timeline. And I'm probably going to leave the scriptures underneath here, and I'm going to give you all my sources because I want this to be methodical. So I'm going to entitle this sort of Introduction to Prophecy. And what that means is we're simply going to go over three major events about Israel in a general timeline and circumstances that are easy to see and identify, and talk about what maybe the application of this is. All right. And the last thing we're going to go over is what the difference is a little bit in how God operates from the old covenant to the new. So that's important too. And I think I'm going to go over one modern day guy that wrote a book, and we'll get to him at the end, that really nailed what's going on right now. So we're going to put all this together. So I want to start with, if you've been in church for as long as I have, one of the most famous verses you've probably heard is 2 Chronicles 7:14. And that verse is quoted and it said, if my people called by my name will turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven and heal their land. So they don't quote the second part. It's verse 15 where this is a God talking to Solomon, and it says that if they will come from this place. Well, why was that important? Because Second Chronicles is recording the ceremony that was done when Solomon dedicated the temple. So the people had they all came together to celebrate this. And then Solomon is given a word from God specifically about what they are to do if they turn. So there's some important things to consider. One, in the Old Covenant, God dealt with kings and prophets to speak. And almost all, I say, Semitic or Middle Eastern people had a temple of worship that was not uncommon to their gods too. So a repentance, a turning to save the nation, was a solemn assembly, meaning a religious ceremony, meaning you made a big deal about it. There was some fasting involved, and it was called by the king or the ruler. The people ratified it. It was written down. It came from the seat of government, and the people entered into this time of prayer and fasting. And if it was that way from the heart, then God would relent. I want to tell you the only time, and someone can check me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am, that we find that in the Bible wasn't Israel, it was Assyria. So the Assyrian story was Jonah shows up and says, you got 40 days and God's going to destroy this place. Do you notice what the king of Assyria did? Declared a solemn assembly, written down, declared to the nation, commanded fasting. The people responded from the heart, and God gave Assyria another 100 years. So much so, that's probably why Jonah was so distraught. Well, I don't want to speculate totally, but if you were a prophet in Israel and you declared something and it didn't happen, your career was over. So he pronounced judgment and they repented. So, but this was the only time it happened. I want to submit something to you. That is the remedy for turning all that has been done for a nation or country and restoring it in totality. That's the only remedy. Now, there is remnant reforms, and this is where we're going to get into the timeline. You'll find it, the aforementioned scriptures that I talked over in the book of Jonah and 2 Chronicles chapter 7. Just in full disclosure. The next one is in 2 Kings chapter 22. And it is recording the reign of Josiah. Now, Josiah found the book of the law, rent his clothes, and started doing a wholesale revival, knocking down all the altars, bringing back the law, and a wholesale revival. But the Bible is clear that it was just a few and through Josiah only. Now, how do I know that? Because your timeline records after Josiah, there was one king, two of them were almost identical names, Jehoiakim and Jehoiachin. One reigned 6 months, another reigned 11 years, and another reigned 6 months after him. And then the final king, the final king, I believe is Jeconiah, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, is when Babylon showed up. And then Zedekiah was a Babylonian plant. He revolted, tried to be in league with Egypt, and they didn't show up. Babylon decimated the place, and Judah was no more. That whole timeline from Josiah, the end of Josiah's reign, to that happening was only 36 years. There was only one king of more than 6 months that reigned after Josiah before Babylon came. So what happened? There was a remnant that turned. So God gave time. But nothing stopped the inevitable, because what 2 Chronicles said did not happen. This period of about 40 years, they had already seen it before. Amos chapter 1 declares the exact year that he began preaching. Amos chapter 7 talks about him going to Jeroboam II. And due to archaeology, we recently discovered in the 20s, we got lots of information on these dates being accurate now. So in Amos chapter 7, Jeroboam basically tells Amos to kick rocks. We're not listening to you. And on a side note, there's a logical reason why he probably shouldn't have in the natural, because Amos predicted it was going to be Assyria. And Israel had just restored the borders of what was the Solomon Empire and were much stronger than the southern tribes. That's probably why you'll record, and I believe that's in Amos 7 again, where he tells Amos, you go prophesy to Judah, the ones that are paying tribute to Assyria, because they're not strong enough to handle these guys. We got no problems here. 52 years later to the day, after Jeroboam is boasting about how mighty they are, they were hauled off and scattered to the four corners of the earth. 52 years later. This is within this generation of about 70 years. And inside this 70-year period, there's this little bang zone between around 40 to 55 years where stuff starts happening. So I want to illustrate the third. First one chronologically, Israel goes down 52 years and down to 52 years is probably pretty darn close. There's some variance in there, but it's within a generation. Number 2, Judah. This one's a little closer, 36 years, right about that 40 to 50 year range of a generation. The other prophet to consider, just to give you a timeline, is Amos was about the same time as Isaiah. Isaiah and Amos lived at the same time. So when these guys saw Israel go down at the height of their power, they were around to see it. So Judah should have been warned, but didn't listen. Now let me go to the third one. 10 tribes scattered. 2 tribes hauled off to Babylon within about 40 years, 40 to 50. Jesus arrives, and his last prediction before going to the cross is saying the temple is going to be destroyed. And that happened in 70 AD, right about exactly 70 years from when Jesus arrived on the earth, and right about 40, give or take a couple years, when he predicted this. What I'm saying is this. These are 3 of the major events in the Bible. And when the last warning comes, it's you got time, but something's going to happen pretty quickly, within probably maybe some people's lifetime. So, what did Jesus say about this in Matthew 24? The verses are 36 to 51. The famous part of it is, no man knows the day or the hour. I don't want to speculate because I got some opinions on what I think that means, but we want to stick with what thus saith the Lord here and not my opinion. But at the end, but obviously that is not being used to tell you you're not supposed to know anything. Because at the end of this dialogue, around right before 51, that's why I'm giving you these scriptures, you can go read them. He said if the porter of the house knew the watch that the thief would come, he would have watched and his house wouldn't have been robbed. There was different watches at night. It's not a stretch to say, look, if you see these things happening and you know you're in this zone, you have a responsibility to now pay attention. That's all I'm saying. Jesus did not call you to say, whatever, I have no idea. Well, hopefully we'll get out of here. Nowhere does it say that. So I'm going to back up and give you one more source, because I want this to be a lot of data and information, because I want you to verify this. These dates that I have, I'm going to tell you where I got them from. Mostly the Bible, but I have in my possession, I'm going to read exactly what it says so I don't misquote this chronological chart. It's an Adams chronological chart or map of history. It is a fold out, it's very large, and it was instituted into the Library of Congress in 1871. That's where I got my information. Okay? Do you notice I'm giving you information, Bible verses, and where I got it from? This is why I've entitled this Prophecy 101. I'm not making anything up, and I'm not speculating. I'm not yelling and screaming about people that may have this point of view or that a point of view. Dear Jesus, we don't have time for that right now. We're just going over nuts and bolts that in the 3 most major events in the Bible concerning Israel, this timeline fits. And the repentance and turning, which is a solemn assembly through government and agreed upon by the people, written down, fasting and solemn assembly. I want you to ask, all I have to do is ask you, has that happened? The answer is no. Well, then there could be a revival, but the Bible's clear that that's what makes God relent. Now the final part. Remember, I alluded to the difference between the old covenant and new covenant, because you're probably saying, well, that's 15 minutes of judgment. I didn't want to hear that. Well, I'm going to give you some good news. God judged the world through Jesus Christ on the cross. So have you noticed that empires aren't laid waste anymore? Because God doesn't judge anybody. This is the grace age. And I'll tell you one of the scriptures I'll use. I don't have this one right down because I'm doing this off the cuff. So it's a famous one where Jesus is, there's a woman that they're bringing out to trap him and saying, we caught her in adultery. The law of Moses says we're to stone her. What say you? And Jesus tells them famously, whoever's without sin casts the first stone. And he says something that is very important. And you need to get this because it talks about the grace age. Where are your accusers? Neither do I condemn you. Now, you need to understand that the only reason why they couldn't do it is because these guys didn't bring out any witnesses, and this was a kind of a dog and pony show, but she was caught guilty as sin, and he didn't condemn her. Because in the grace age, he's telling us, I'm not going to condemn anybody, but there is a condemnation, and what is it? It says your unbelief is your condemnation. It means you're going to reap what you sow. So the timeline isn't going to be as exact in the grace age, because actually you get more time. Because God's going to let this go all the way till the stuff you put in the ground eventually comes up nothing. The good news is God is being wonderfully gracious. The bad news is sometimes people don't see it that way and they stay blinded. So I told you I want to give you a modern day example of a guy. He's passed away. He's gone on to be with the Lord. He's in heaven now. He wrote a book in 1975. His name was David Wilkerson. And the book was entitled, Set the Trumpet to Thy Mouth. That was 45 years ago. I'm not going to go into a bunch of the book. I'd recommend you read it. It's pretty good. It's not that long. As a matter of fact, you can, if you search it out on YouTube, you can actually get somebody that will dictate the book to you without reading. They'll just talk it as if they'll read it for you to you, which is kind of neat because me and my family did that with that book. We did kind of like a nightly gathering, and we listened to 30 minutes a night until the book was over. And so I recommend that way. Recommend that, by the way. So one of the things that I do need to bring up, just to give you that this guy nailed it. In 1975, he predicted that the United States of America would accept and applaud homosexuality. In 1975, nobody would have thought that. Now, maybe say, well, he might be all right, but to go as far as to have a Pride Month, I don't think people would have thought, but he nailed it. And that was just one. That was 45 years ago, guys. Are we in that watch? The evidence says yes. So have I illustrated why I'm not predicting a date and a time? Right? We're in the grace age. I don't know exactly when reaping and sowing gets to the point where it's over. I don't. But this period of time that is in between, the big one is 70 years. The smallest portion that I mentioned was 38. You better start thinking about that. The only question is when did this start? Okay, now there's a ton more I could get into. And the only reason, I just left the door open because we could talk about Isaiah's ministry and when it started and a timeline for him. And that timeline between his beginning in Babylon, hauling him off. But that'd be a whole nother video. But I wanted to mention it just so you knew that I'm trying to get these prophets lined up for you. They lived at the same time. And the beginning of Isaiah's ministry was Isaiah 6. And it was during the same king that Amos started his ministry. Isaiah's was when King Uzziah died. All right. So why do I think this is important? I've spent time personally where I was just radically out of balance when it comes to this prophetic stuff. Where I was starting to read, and I admitted I got so bent out of shape for probably a year or so, and I was finding every false teacher under the sun, and it was just breeding a whole lot of anger, and I wasn't helping myself, my family, or anybody else. So I'm not here to call out anybody. But I'm going to tell you, I'm also not here to sit here and applaud when it seems like folks are just making stuff up. Okay? I want people, I want to bring to you living water, nuts and bolts, ABC 1, 2, 3. Don't overcomplicate this. You are called to watch. You are called to pay attention. And so what's that mean today? Well, I'm going to give you one little practical thing to keep you, to let you know where I'm going with this. Don't sit in the seat of mockers and scoffers. I'll tell you what I mean by that. Don't do what I talked about I struggled with and go mocking and scoffing and finding every false teacher and prophet you can find because you might be yelling and screaming at a guy that's right. Don't do that. But also, if people are doing things to do practical stuff like growing food, trying to homestead, maybe even prepping, don't mock them. Don't make fun of them because they're paying attention to something. Now, you may think they're going overboard. You may think that that this isn't the best way to go about it, but they're paying attention. And you ought to do the same. Don't make fun of them. It's not real Christ-like anyway. We got enough thorns and thistles people that are yelling and screaming at everybody, making fun of people, and swearing up and down they got the greatest thing everyone needs to hear to save their life, or the greatest revelation anybody's ever heard. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to teach some nuts and bolts of what I've learned and get people to pay attention. Because ultimately I care about whether people understand things, because it was deeply important to me. I'm just communicating out of my heart what's been important to me. So I'd recommend watching this video a second time, and not because you need to hear me talk again. It's because if you didn't get the scriptures, I want you to write them down. And remember, read the whole chapter and get a timeline. Because if you get some dates, also it helps you understand the Bible if you know about when this was happening. Okay? So just trying to help you. So what's some advice? I've alluded to this in a previous video. Whatever God calling you to do, dear Jesus, do it now. If you want to make some YouTube videos, make some YouTube videos. If you want to write. If you need to start, getting your house in order, if you need to grow a garden, if you need to move, I've said this before in other videos. Don't let anybody talk you out of it. If you know, and you know inside, and you're reading the signs, and it's from the Bible, ABC 1, 2, 3. We went over old and new. Then do it. All right. This one was a little longer one. Well, not really. Let's see. I got a little time clock in front of me now. My old camera didn't have this, so I know how long I've been talking. It's kind of like a mini sermon. What am I, about 24 minutes? So that's a nice little sermonette. I guess that'll work. But at any rate, I hope I said something to hit your head and to stimulate your heart and give you some understanding. So until next time, be of good cheer and be of good courage.